I'm Jenna Ellis. Join me coming up on Jenna Ellis tonight at 9 p.m. Eastern on the Salem News Channel. We have a lot of legal news to break down. Ken Paxton out of Texas has a phenomenal win against Meta. We'll discuss that with our Legal Eagle panel, along with Joe Biden and his proposition for reform, quote unquote, to the U.S. Supreme Court and to the Article 3 branch. And the Wall Street Journal editorial board actually came out today and said that this is an attack against democracy. We'll talk about that and a couple of other legal topics, as well as having Josh Hammer on from Newsweek to talk all about the Middle East conflict, where foreign policy goes from here, and also the Venezuela election. What you need to know here on Jenna Ellis tonight on the Salem News Channel, coming up 9 p.m. Eastern. Well, friends, you might have heard that Mike Lindell and MyPillow no longer have the support of their box stores or shopping channels the way that they used to. They've been part of this cancel culture, so they want to pass along the savings directly to you by having a $25 extravaganza. I love that word, extravaganza. When Mike started MyPillow, it was just a one-product company. With the help of his dedicated employees, they now have hundreds of products, some you may not even know about. To get the word out, I want to invite my listeners to check out their $25 extravaganza. 2-pack multi-use My Pillows are just $25. My Pillow sandals, also awesome, only $25. Their 6-pack towel sets are $25. And brand new 4-pack dish towels, you guessed it, just $25. For the first time ever, the premium My Pillows with the all-new Giza fabric, just $25. And orders over $75 will receive free shipping too. This amazing offer won't last long. Go to mypillow.com, use the promo code Jenna, or call 800-564-8475 today. That's 800-564-8475, or go to mypillow.com and use the promo code Jenna. Good evening and welcome to Jenna Ellis tonight. So Joe Biden is still the current sitting president, which I think actually should concern more of us than we're just kind of glossing over that fact. But he apparently penned an op-ed in the Washington Post yesterday calling for Supreme Court and judicial reform. And we all know he didn't really write that. His handlers did. And, it's not like he's sitting back at his beach house with his quill pen, writing prose while he's not doing his job in the Oval Office, but this really should concern a lot of Americans that the Democrats are pushing for this type of reform that really would make the Article 3 branch of government a political creature of the two political branches. And even the Wall Street Journal had an editorial board opinion piece this morning that called out Joe Biden. It said this: Biden's political assault on the Supreme Court, his destructive plan would make the justices servants of the politics of the day. President Biden on Monday announced his plan to, quote unquote, reform the Supreme Court. And it's important to understand how radical this political moment is. The president is putting the full weight of the Democrat Party behind an assault on judicial independence and the constitutional order. You might call it an attack on democracy. So let's get our legal eagles to weigh in. Let's welcome Will Chamberlain, who's senior counsel for the Article 3 project, and Michael Donnelly, who is an attorney and law professor. So, Will, let's start with you. I think the Wall Street Journal is actually right. This is an attack on democracy for the party that claims that democracy is on the ballot. Maybe we shouldn't vote for them after all.
I mean, it's an attack on our system of government. They intend to place term limits on Supreme Court justices via legislation, is my understanding. That's very much unconstitutional because the Constitution is the document that grants life tenure to justices. They want to eliminate the new finding of presidential immunity. And my message to Joe Biden is, put your money where your mouth is. Any president has the ability to waive any defense they want to. He should just go ahead and waive his presidential immunity defense going forward. If there's nothing to worry about, if this isn't such a big deal, then fine, let yourself get prosecuted. We'll be happy to oblige you. And then I think and then the final thing was this binding code of ethics. Let's be real. Congress doesn't even bind itself with a code of ethics, and they want to bind the Supreme Court. That would be a massive violation of the separation of powers. Congress doesn't get to tell the Supreme Court what to do. And the Supreme Court has already put in place its own code of ethics that it's voluntarily going forward. But the idea that Congress would be able to have an enforcement mechanism over the Supreme Court, I mean, this is very, very basic a very, very basic balance of powers problem. The branches shouldn't be able to dominate one another. And the idea that that would effectively make Congress the supervisor of the Supreme Court, which is not what our founders intended.
Yeah, so and very well said. Mike, what's your reaction to this proposal by the Democrats?
Well, who cares what Joe Biden says? I guess I would start with he's a lame duck president at best. What matters is who the president is. And frankly, on this issue, it doesn't really matter. This is for Congress to decide. If Congress wants to rein in the Supreme Court, which we should have a conversation about, they can do that by passing a constitutional amendment and getting 3/4 of the states to ratify it. It's a very tall order, probably not going to happen. But if we want to talk about problems that our country needs to solve, one of them is the fact that the federal government is too big. I've said before on this program, the federal government is the biggest threat to our freedom. And when we talk about freedom, we want to be able to decide for ourselves how we're going to live and what laws govern us. And I'd like to see the states step up and, protect us more from the overreach of the federal government. And one of those branches that has reached in and over the states is the Supreme Court of the United States. In many cases, over 100 years, it has struck down state laws. It has invalidated state constitutional amendments. And I disagree with that. I don't think the court should be allowed to do that. I think that's one area where we need to be looking at reform. I do think, though, also to Will's point, I'd love to have a conversation with him about this. I mean, the Constitution does make Congress the supervisor of the Supreme Court. It gives Congress a lot of power over the court in terms of the rules of conduct, the structure of the court. It can determine how many justices there are. There's nothing magic about 9 justices. Frankly, I think the 9 justices we have are overworked. When you look at how the states do it, states do elect judges. They have retention elections. Sometimes they're appointed and then retained. And in a lot of cases, there are partisan elections. So I think there's a conversation we need to have about the Supreme Court of the United States. It's too powerful. There's too much power concentrated in just a few hands. And, Mark Levin wrote a book called Men in Black. And I think we need to revisit this question and have a conversation about it.
Yeah, and he wasn't talking about Will Smith. So Will, what's your response to that pushback a little bit from Mike?
Well, I mean, the structure of the court, obviously, there is some amount of supervision that the Congress does have over the court, right? Funding is a good example of it, right? The Supreme Court doesn't get to set its own funding levels. That's set by Congress. There's some negotiation there. But and also he's right that there isn't an absolute guarantee of the number of judges. However, it would be a massive, enormous breach of norms given that we haven't had an increase in the size of the court in well over, I think, probably 150 years, something like since the 1800s. So it's kind of settled at 9. And I don't think changing the composition of the court would not decrease the power of the court. Rather, it would just steer the court in a completely different direction. And I don't actually believe fundamentally that the court is too powerful. I think that the court is a guardian of the individual rights enshrined in the Bill of Rights. Our structure of government is not like Britain, where the parliament can basically do what it wants. Our Congress has limitations on it. And if you reduce the power, make the court subordinate to Congress, then you're basically, turning any of the rights guarantees on the Constitution into just words on paper and nothing that actually is enforced.
So, Mike, your response to that, because conservatives for a long time, especially, you and I have both been advocates of the Convention of States project, which does have as one of its subject matter judicial reform for a long time. And some of the advocates for Convention of States have called actually for an increase in the court and a different method than presidential nomination with advice and consent of the Senate and, of course, through constitutional amendment. And so the Democrats aren't the first ones to have this conversation. I think they're pushing it for far different reasons. But where do you draw those distinctions between what conservatives have long advocated for and what the Democrats' proposal is here?
Well, I think what conservatives have called for is a return to originalism. It's not original that the Supreme Court has had the authority to impose the Bill of Rights on the states. That's the doctrine of incorporation, selective incorporation, which I don't think was intended by the 14th Amendment. And it has caused all kinds of problems. That's why we got Roe v. Wade, which has been overturned by Dobbs. So, this is not an easy thing. And a lot of people who've gone to law school in recent years, and most lawyers, don't understand how the court has become as powerful that it is. They just assume that it is. They assume that, oh, yeah, of course, the Supreme Court, should police the Bill of Rights. That's not what the founders intended. The founders intended the Bill of Rights to apply to the federal government, not to the states. And when you use the Bill of Rights to give the court power over the states by nationalizing the Bill of Rights, you give the court power that it was never intended to have. And when you look at some of the founders who wrote in the anti-federalist papers, like Brutus in number 15, he said, someday the judges, because they have lifetime appointments and over cases they will accrue this power, they will think themselves to be independent of heaven. I mean, when you look at some of the cases like Justice Kennedy has written, for example, Obergefell and some other cases over the years, you can see why the founders were concerned about that.
Yeah. So, Will, I mean, I think that there is a debate to be had here, and I think that we're all in agreement that Biden's proposal overall would be giving too much political power to a party that clearly just wants the outcomes that they prefer. But how would you respond to that in terms of conservatives calling for judicial reform for well before Biden ever even became president, or any of these more narrow concerns that we're seeing heading into the 2024 election?
Well, I'm skeptical of this claim that incorporation is such a bad thing. I mean, if you don't incorporate the First and Second Amendment into the Constitution and apply it to the states, then liberal states could simply ban private gun ownership and censor whatever speech they want. It's this, unless they have a constitutional guarantee in their own individual state constitution. And I mean, give me a break. California, if they even had such a guarantee, they'd repeal it. So I think it's important to protect the liberty of all Americans who live in blue states in particular. Protect them from the overreach of their state governments, to protect, the specific rights that are in the Constitution. So I can see that there can be problems with incorporation in specific instances, but I don't think the issue with Roe v. Wade was primarily incorporation. The issue with Roe v. Wade was the flawed interpretation of the Due Process Clause, and creating the notion that there's a substantive right to privacy.
Mike, I know that you want to respond to that.
No, he's right. Maybe I misspoke, but no, he's right. The substantive due process is where the court got Roe v. Wade. But it was this idea that the court can strike down state laws or has the authority over states. I'm much more comfortable with a world where the Supreme Court does not nationalize the Bill of Rights. I think we've gone way too far towards giving the federal government in all three branches too much power, and we need to go back in the other direction. So I think this is a great debate and discussion for us to have, Jenna. Thanks for having it. I hope we can have more conversation about it.
Yeah, for sure. And unfortunately, we only have 12 minutes in this segment, so we're already out of time. But where I land on this issue is that I tend to agree more with Mike on this, that the Supreme Court has far too much authority to determine all these issues for the states. And when we're looking at a substantive Bill of Rights, I mean, this is why each of the states, it's the 50 laboratories of democracy, and we need to have those democratic elements within a constitutional republic. I'm a lot more comfortable with the Supreme Court having a lot less power, but we need to talk about judicial reform. We'll have our legal eagles back to talk about another case a little bit later in the program, but we'll be right back to talk foreign policy right after this. Well, tensions are still rising in the Middle East, even after the address to Congress last week from Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, and this coming from the Washington Post this morning. The region braces for Netanyahu to decide Israeli response to Golan Heights strike. Civilians on both sides of the Israel-Lebanon border braced Monday for the Israeli army to launch a counterstrike of a scale, scope, and intensity that is still unknown after Israel's Security Cabinet authorized a military response to the weekend rocket attack from Lebanon that killed 12, all teenagers and children. Just horrific. The region was gripped with uncertainty, hoping for a calibrated pinpoint response, but prepping for a widespread assault that diplomats warned could erupt into a regional war. So let's welcome in Josh Hammer, who is a senior counsel for the Article 3 Project and editor at large for Newsweek, and also the host of the Josh Hammer Show, which gives just really critical commentary on so many of the day's issues. So Josh, we've also seen from John Kirby, the spokesperson in the Biden administration, saying that, he thinks that it's a little bit too early to tell whether there will be more of a wide-scale response to this. Where does Israel go with just yet another act of sheer terrorism?
Well, Jenna, unfortunately, I mean, even earlier today, actually, it looks like one additional civilian was killed in the Israeli north by yet another Hezbollah rocket strike. Recall that 1 week ago at this time, the conversation was about how a rocket from Yemen, from the Houthi rebels in Yemen, actually struck about 100 meters or so from the U.S. consulate in Tel Aviv and killing at least one civilian there, right in the heart of Israel, right in Tel Aviv as well. So, at this point, Israel is under sustained assault on virtually all fronts. We're talking here about a 5, 6, maybe even 7-front war, whether or not you want to count individual different types of jihadist outfits as fronts unto themselves. Ultimately, it gets back to Iran. Okay, Iran is the head of the snake, as the Israeli military calls it. Some people in American foreign policy circles use that term as well. Iran is the obvious, unequivocal head of the snake of all current regional chaos and this full-scale, this full-frontal jihad against the state of Israel. Hezbollah up north in Lebanon is one of Iran's favorite proxies. They are directly controlled by Tehran. They have been for literally decades now. And when it comes to the north in particular, you're talking here about at least 60 to 70, maybe even upwards of 80 to 100,000 civilians who have not returned to their homes since October 7th or October 8th, 2023. It was literally within hours of Hamas committing the single worst atrocity of the Jewish people since Hitler's death in 1945. It was literally within hours of that Hezbollah started firing mortars and rockets into northern Israel, therefore requiring evacuations there. So, I was there in January until this day. Obviously, we're about a half a year since I was last there. But till this day, there are tens and tens of thousands of Israelis who are currently in refugee facilities and displaced persons facilities, simply because the situation up north with Hezbollah has not been resolved. And, I think what Israel would prefer to do, Jenna, would be to wait out this Biden-Harris poop show, for lack of a better term, and wait until Donald Trump gets back into office January 2025, whereby they could get more cover to really go on the offensive against Hezbollah. The problem is that Iran and Hezbollah know that. They know that Donald Trump has a decent chance of winning and that they have all the incentive in the world to expedite things right now. Ultimately, Israel's not going to be able to just sit back and take it. The community that was tragically struck on the soccer pitch in the Golan Heights on Saturday were actually not even Jews. They were Arabs. They were Druze Arabs. The Druze are an ethnic minority in the Levant, in Israel, Syria, Lebanon, wherever they are. They are wonderful people. They are amazing patriots. I've never met an Israeli, Jew, Christian, Arab alike who did not love the Druze. They are among the most loyal people to the state of Israel. And Israel is going to have to retaliate for these children that were just wantonly murdered with Iranian and Hezbollah blood all over them there. What exactly that looks like, I think, remains to be determined. But they are going to have to strike back here, whether Netanyahu wants to or not.
Yeah, and you mentioned, Josh, kind of this uncertainty and this question surrounding the United States and our election that's coming up in, just about 3 months. Is there a potential opportunity, if Donald Trump does actually win, from November 5th until January 20th, that there's going to be real uncertainty because we'll be in the midst of a presidential transition, but still not have Donald Trump in office until January 20th? I mean, are there any conversations that you're aware of just on a national security front and even a foreign policy front that addresses those couple of months?
Well, I mean, that is the most vulnerable time, of any democracy, of any republic, is the transition period. I mean, that by definition is when your enemies start to kind of, rear their fangs and they're out for blood at that time. Unfortunately, Jenna, that's normally about 100 days or so, a few months. That 100 days in this particular juncture has been extended out to now. I mean, till July of 2024, for the very simple reason that we know that Joe Biden is now not running for re-election. And, why stop with Iran? I mean, frankly, if I were I'm obviously not, but if I were a communist in Beijing, if I were trying to advise Xi Jinping what to do, I would think that now is probably a very logical time to try to invade Taiwan. Again, why not? I mean, this is kind of the perfect time for America's enemies all throughout the world to be trying to pull off all sorts of stunts there, which is obviously terrifying. And it creates a terrible situation as well for Kamala Harris, because she can't disassociate herself so much from Biden's policies. She actually helped implement those policies. The flip side of that is that it presents a golden opportunity to Donald Trump, if he would like to seize it, to create a clear contrast with this very addled current regime.
Yeah, absolutely. And Kamala Harris has a real conundrum with her Veep stakes problem because, Josh Shapiro, the governor of Pennsylvania, who is Jewish, has been, lauded as one of the top picks. But if she selects him and he is more pro-Israel than, some of the pro-Palestine, pro-terror base of the Democrats would prefer, that would pose a problem. But if she doesn't select him, isn't that signaling that she is really pro-Palestine, pro-terror, and giving even a better opportunity for Donald Trump?
Yeah, she's really between a rock and a hard place on this one. I mean, the far left has been trying to get this hashtag genocide Josh or say no to genocide Josh going over the past few days there. I mean, that is transparently and wildly and flagrantly anti-Semitic stuff. I mean, the fact that Josh Shapiro, someone who has a very typically Jewish name like Josh Shapiro, is singled out alone, and none of the other candidates, most of whom are fairly equally pro-Israel to him, that none of them have their own hashtags, genocide. I mean, that is an obvious, clear double standard. Now, look, I mean, I disagree with Josh Shapiro on the overwhelming majority of issues. Heck, I probably disagree with him a lot when it comes to Israeli-Palestinian conflict and Middle East policy. He is, at the end of the day, a Democrat. I mean, he is not a conservative guy. Yeah, exactly. He is a Democrat. But I mean, she is between a rock and a hard place here. And if she does pick Josh Shapiro, she probably is going to risk losing a lot of those Hamas voters in Dearborn, Michigan, which says all you need to know about the current degraded and frankly morally dilapidated state of the current Democratic Party.
Yeah, so where should, just in the last minute we have, where should the Trump messaging go from this? Because I'm not really seeing hardly anything from the Trump campaign on this issue. And I think this is a real opportunity for, some American Jews who typically would vote Democrat to maybe have a change in party, at least for this election.
Yeah, look, so the American Jewish vote historically has been something of a fool's gold for Republicans, for the very simple reason that most American Jews, unfortunately, tragically, in fact, I would say, are not particularly religious. Obviously, the more traditional, the more religious the Jew is, the more likely he is to be politically conservative, to vote Republican. But certainly in this situation, I would think that Trump should be messaging not just to Jews, but to Christians as well, Jenna, such as yourself, who are reliable supporters of Israel and ought to be horrified by what is currently happening out there.
Yeah, well, we'll be right back with more on the Foreign Policy Note with Josh Hammer right after this. And we're back with Josh Hammer. So let's turn to the situation now in Venezuela. Post their election, we're seeing a lot of unrest and protests there. And this is just some wild footage that is coming out from there. And some media outlets are even characterizing this as an attempted coup or a stolen election. Or an attempt at a stolen election. What's going on, Josh, and what do you make of it?
Well, it seems like that's exactly what has happened. I mean, the polls in the lead up, and query how reliable pollsters we have in a socialist country like Venezuela, a country that tragically has lost virtually all of its net worth over the past 25 years, since Chavez and Maduro took over. But all of the polls, to the extent those polls mean anything, really showed that Maduro was likely going to lose. And, as it may be, based on the anecdotal data that we have, based on the turnout early on in the returns, it looked like he was indeed losing. And then, magically overnight, comes the morning after, it looks like he has, quote unquote, prevailed. All sorts of stories coming in about people who are poll workers there in these various precincts, both in Caracas and out broader, further out from the capital in the further provinces of Venezuela. Lots of anecdotal stories about literal police, Maduro's police coming in and seizing ballots. I mean, third world banana republic dictatorship type stuff. which unfortunately ought to have been expected because, again, this is an essentially communist regime. This is the closest regime to Cuba in all of the Americas and all of Latin America in general. Venezuela is a close ally of Iran, of China, of all of America's most vicious adversaries at this point. It didn't have to be this way in Venezuela. Venezuela is actually blessed as a matter of natural resources to sit on extraordinarily large oil and natural gas preserves when it comes to hydrocarbons that are sitting right there in the earth under that plot of land. But socialism has truly and utterly destroyed Venezuela. Maduro is an absolute thug. I saw Tony Blinken, actually, our harebrained Secretary of State, even he kind of said that we're not necessarily prepared to accept the legitimacy of these returns. I guess the question is, what are you actually going to do about it? I mean, are you going to start sanctioning diplomats? Are you going to start expelling diplomats? I mean, the United Nations, which is obviously an infamous joke of a body, are they going to do anything whatsoever? Probably not, as you and I both know. But, the world at a bare minimum, Jenna, ought to be asking these kind of questions where you have a situation like this that reeks of obvious fraud and a socialist strongman who ought not to continue to be in power, but he's rigging his own election to stay in power.
So what is the situation then within Venezuela? I mean, do the people have any process to challenge this, or is Maduro just going to get away with it?
Well, look, you're talking here about a country that doesn't really have, a durable constitutional order like America's has. I'm not saying that our constitutional order is not without its problems, to be clear. I mean, we're currently in the middle of quite a stress test right now, when it comes to the Jack Smith probes and this current Supreme Court, quote unquote, reform. But, comparing that to Venezuela is apples and oranges. I mean, we're not talking here about a country that has a well-developed body of political and legal thought. There's no Alexander Hamilton, James Madison written Federalist Papers there. So what I mean to say is that, whatever court of last appeal, whatever judiciary, whatever courts they may or may not have as a matter of their positive law there, Maduro essentially controls it because his people are in charge there. The socialists have been running Venezuela for 25 years. So there's really not much of an appeal, to be honest with you. I mean, ultimately, in a situation like this, whether it's Venezuela, whether it is Iran, North Korea, God help the truly poor people living in a country like North Korea, Cuba, obviously, right in our own backyard. When it comes to countries like this, the only viable long-term solution is for the people to overthrow the regime of their own accord. Easier said than done. I am not pretending like this is an easy thing to do. It's obviously an extraordinarily difficult thing to do. But there is only so much domestically that can possibly happen at this point. I guess the other alternative is that the world, collectively speaking, whether it's the UN or some other transnational body, could send in troops or elections supervisors, but it's just not going to happen, Jenna. You and I both know that.
Yeah, it's really sad, and I think a very cautionary tale to America that we should cherish our constitutional republic, our rule of law, and our moral and upright society, or at least what it used to be. And this is why conservatives really are trying to conserve our order in America. But we'll be right back with more with our Legal Eagle panel right after this. In yet another exercise of targeting Christians for simply exercising our faith, the ACLU of Virginia has filed a lawsuit against Liberty University, and this is the headline from ACLU Virginia. Liberty University sued for firing Eleanor Zinski. His real name is Jonathan, by the way, so we're going to call him a he. Because I don't do the whole pronoun nonsense. But Liberty University sued for firing Jonathan for being transgender. This out of Richmond, Virginia. Today, the ACLU of Virginia and Butler Kerwood filed a lawsuit on behalf of this biological male, whom Liberty University fired in violation of Title VII of the Civil Rights Act of 1964 after he disclosed his identity as a trans woman. Quote, no one should be fired because of who they are, but Liberty University made it clear that's exactly why it fired this person going by the name of Eleanor, said ACLU of Virginia senior transgender rights attorney Wyatt Rolla. Quote, workplace discrimination against transgender people is against the law. And listen to this. And it's especially telling that Liberty University sees a practicing Christian's gender identity as so antithetical to its mission that it was willing to flout the law in order to cast out one of its own. So this is absolutely insane to me that the ACLU thinks that it can tell a Christian university who is a practicing Christian and basically is saying, Liberty University, we expect you to practice Christianity according to the beliefs of the God that we don't believe in and how we are telling you to practice your own Christian faith. And by the way, it's wrong. So let's welcome in our legal eagles to discuss more. Will Chamberlain and Mike Donnelly are back with us. So, Mike, I'll start with you. This to me was so offensive and ridiculous that the ACLU, in their own statement, is telling Liberty University that this person who now claims to be a transgender woman, in violation of the hiring practices of Liberty University, that this person, this male, actually signed and acknowledged and said, I'm willing in exchange for a job to go along with this private institution. Now the ACLU is suggesting that Liberty University, as a Christian institution, has to practice its Christian faith in accordance to what the ACLU believes. I mean, this is just yet another link in the chain of saying we're going to target the baker, we're going to target the website designer, now we're going to target Christian universities.
Well, Liberty University is a Christian university, and they get to decide for themselves what their faith means in their doctrinal statement. And if you look into this, you'll see their doctrinal statement talks about that they believe that, people are the sex that they are when they were born, like most Christians. I mean, I guess I wonder what this Jonathan's Christianity is, and if he's had the opportunity to read Matthew 19:4, where Jesus himself points back to Genesis saying, have you not read that God created them male and female? I mean, that's the ultimate issue here. Do you believe that or not? And Jesus himself said that was the truth. So if you want to call yourself a Christian, which Christian faith are you following? The faith that I follow recognizes that men are men and women are women, and that's Orthodox Christianity. This is going to give the Supreme Court a chance to revisit Bostock if it goes further. Bostock, of course, is the case where Justice Gorsuch wrote a majority opinion finding that the definition of sex in Title VII, which is what the ACLU is pointing to here, included sexual orientation and gender identity as protected classes. Justice Alito, in his dissent, called out the court majority. It was a 5-4 decision saying there's only one thing to call what the court has done today: legislation. If Congress had wanted to have Title VII protect sexual orientation and gender identity, they would have done that explicitly. I mean, when Congress wrote Title VII decades ago, nobody had any idea about transgender this or sexual orientation in the definition of sex.
Yeah, and well, it seems like this is an intentional targeting. I mean, the fact pattern here is very suspicious, in my opinion, and we'll see how this plays out at the trial court level, if it even gets that far. But, this is a person who was hired by Liberty University's IT. He signed the doctrinal statement saying, yes, I agree. And then 3 months later, 3 months, decides to come out as a trans woman, and then the ACLU just happens to now represent him in this lawsuit. This to me seems like yet another type of a setup, just like what we've seen in the second iteration of the Masterpiece case. This just seems like the left is purposefully saying you can practice any faith that you want except you, Christians.
Yeah, I think it's a little bit of both. I mean, my reading is also that the Liberty said that you are fired because you're trans, which means that they're ready for litigation. They're running right squarely into Bostock when they say that. And I'm just curious kind of what Liberty's litigation strategy is going to be here. Are they going to go straight up to the Supreme Court and say, you got Bostock wrong, reverse it? I mean, I agree. They did get Bostock wrong. They should reverse it. It was, a really tortured reading of the civil rights statute to get to the result in Bostock. Or are they going to try and go for some sort of religious liberty argument where they say that the as applied to a religious institution, this is a violation of freedom of religion? I'm not a huge expert on the religious liberty cases, so I don't really know exactly what the result would be if they went for that or what their odds would be. But I'm curious as to what the approach is, because I have to feel like, on the one hand, you have this guy getting into work and then saying he's trans 3 months later. Clearly, there's an attempt to create a case there against Liberty. But it seems like Liberty is just as happy to litigate this because they aren't trying to find, fire him based on some other reason. They're like, no, you're fired because you're trans. It's like, oh, okay. Let's go.
Yeah, well, and I think good for them, right? Because they're standing up firmly and saying, if you violate one of the main agreements in your employment contract, which is specifically we are a Christian university. Here's our doctrinal statement. It's not like that was latent and he didn't know that he was signing it in exchange for employment. They're saying, okay, that is the basis, and we are willing to stand firmly on our right to do that as a private institution and a Christian institution. And so Mike, do you think that that there can be kind of this dual strategy of specifically challenging Bostock, as both of you mentioned, but also religious liberty grounds?
It's going to be hard under religious liberty grounds. I don't think liberty is going to fit into the ministerial exception or some of the other exceptions that are available. I don't see how how liberty is able to qualify for the exceptions that are available. They're getting federal funds, lots of them. I'm not an employment lawyer regularly, but I'm pretty sure I thought you had to go to the Equal Employment Commission first. I could be wrong about that, so I'm kind of surprised that they're going directly to court before they go to the EEOC. I mean, EEOC complaints take a long time to adjudicate, though, so it may be that they can go straight to court. In which case, we'll get to the Supreme Court in a couple of years, hopefully. And the things have changed a bit at the Supreme Court. Roberts was on the majority opinion in Bostock, so either Roberts or Gorsuch is going to have to change their mind. And Gorsuch wrote that opinion. So we'll see what happens. It's going to be interesting.
Yeah. And, and to that point, Will, I mean, do you think that Justice Gorsuch is potentially seeing all of the backlash and, recognizing that maybe that was a bad decision and the court is looking for an opportunity to at least clarify that, to narrow it a bit, or is he still firmly sort of solid in that, at least as far as we can tell?
I mean, I don't know. It's hard to say. It's a big ask to ask the same. Effectively, I think there's only one justice different on the court, right? Amy Coney Barrett is now on the court, and she wasn't on the court in Bostock, but it was 6-3, right?
Jackson,
we only had,
in
Jackson, right? But Jackson was just 1-for-1. So anyway, it was a 6-3 decision. Yeah. We need to not only win Barrett, we need to peel off one of the people who voted for Bostock in the first place, as you mentioned. I don't think our odds are good. It hasn't been very long, and it's a big thing to ask the court to just say, oops, we were wrong 5 years later. And even in the absence of some, this isn't some massive decision regulating a huge industry that's having catastrophic impacts on that industry or something where you're like, oh my gosh, we totally screwed up. It's like the same concerns that we were raised 5 years ago are going to be raised again. It's the same basic argument that they rejected 5 years ago. They shouldn't have, but as a gambling man, I would not bet on success here for liberty.
Yeah, and in just the last 15 seconds, Mike, do you think that perhaps some of these private Christian institutions should stop taking money from the government? Is that the solution?
Well, if they don't want Title VII, then they should stop taking the money. Yes.
Yeah. All right. Well, I think that's a good note to end on, but we'll be right back with more with our Legal Eagle panel to address one last legal topic. So much in the news. We'll be right back with more here on Jenna Ellis Tonight. We're back with our legal eagles, Will Chamberlain from the Article 3 Project and Mike Donnelly, who is an attorney and law professor. And we'll end on a high note, this coming from Ken Paxton earlier today with a great win. Breaking news, we have secured a $1.4 billion settlement with Meta. This is, of course, Facebook, the Mark Zuckerberg group, to stop the company's practice of capturing and using the personal biometric data of millions of Texans without the authorization required by law. This settlement is the largest ever obtained from an action brought by a single state and the largest privacy settlement an attorney general has ever obtained. This serves as a warning to any companies engaged in practices that violate Texans' privacy rights. So, Will, let's come to you first. Your thoughts?
I mean, it's a big victory for Texas. $1.4 billion is nothing to sneeze at. Apparently, this litigation's been going on for well over a decade now, or at least the original claims manifested themselves almost 13 years ago when Facebook finally allowed you to tag people in posts, and Facebook then was able to capture biometric data. So this is a long time coming, but congratulations to Ken Paxton and the Texas AG's office for successfully litigating this to a pretty remarkable settlement. And can't say I feel sorry for Facebook. I mean, they were playing fast and loose with the rules around privacy, and they've been an obnoxious company to the right. So, if you want me to be favorable to you because you've, been siding with us politically, well, you haven't. So, have the law enforced.
Yeah, and Mike Donnelly, this has been a huge discussion and conversation about privacy rights, and people who want to participate in these platforms having to turn over so much data, and these companies capturing things that maybe even users aren't aware of. And so, how important is this victory ultimately for privacy rights of Americans?
I think it's an important victory, and I congratulate Ken Paxton. He's a great attorney general. But let's put this in context also. $1.4 billion is chump change for Facebook. It's less than 0.5% of their gross profit. So this isn't hurting Facebook at all. Now, hopefully it will send a message to others that, you better comply with the data privacy laws or you're going to pay some money. But it's not a lot of money. But what I do love to see the states passing laws and attorneys general protecting their citizens. And I'd like to see more states doing that. Another example is age verification for adult websites. 19 states have passed laws requiring adult websites to do real age verification, which has actually had the impact of reducing or eliminating some of these adult websites being able to be accessed by minors, which is a huge victory in my opinion. So to the states, I say, keep going, do more, enforce those laws, protect your citizens. Good job.
Yeah, and I hope that Republican attorneys general will continue to have the types of lawsuits and the guts, frankly, that AG Paxton has had. And Will, he's facing yet another potential impeachment, and a lot of criticism from within really Democrat light of his own party. And yet he's still filing these lawsuits. And another great one is Missouri Attorney General Andrew Bailey, who just also won a really good victory against the Biden-Harris administration over the border wall, and basically an enforcement to actually have to continue that completion, which was one of the Trump administration's promises. And so, in just the last couple of minutes we have with you both here, why aren't more Republican attorneys general challenging these types of issues and stepping up to the fight in the ways that we've seen in Paxton and Andrew Bailey and maybe a couple of others?
Yeah, I can't believe they're thinking about impeaching Paxton again. The Texans really need to think about changing their constitution to weaken the impeachment power. My understanding is that the moment you're impeached by the House, you're removed from office until you get cleared by the Senate. And I think they need to change that because it's just letting the House get away with all sorts of frivolity and disrupting what the people have voted for. Back on the question of why don't other state AGs do more of this? Well, they like their jobs and they like just kind of enjoying themselves and eventually being able to take positions as cushy lobbyists. It's up to us to pressure our politicians to actually do their jobs. I think of somebody like Chris Carr in Georgia, who hasn't done a single thing about Fani Willis perjuring herself during the Trump criminal trial or the Trump pre-trial litigation. Ridiculous that hasn't happened.
And so, Mike, do you think that some of this for overall Republicans just is a lack of political will?
Yeah, I think what Will said is exactly right. And I'm really proud of my Attorney General, Patrick Morrisey, who has led the charge in so many places. And now he's going to be governor of West Virginia. So, for those attorneys general who understand that, if you want to go to higher office, you need to fight. And fighting against the federal government, especially if you're in a red state, is good politics. In some states, maybe not. And honestly, I think there's also another element, which is not all attorneys general have other duties. So different states have different roles for attorneys general. So not all have the same flexibility or freedom. But, it's good to see them sign on. And anyway, this is a good result. And, my hat's off to Ken Paxton and, all the attorneys general who fight against federal overreach and also private companies. It's really important.
Yeah. All right. Well, we're already out of time. Thanks so much, Illegal Eagles. And we are out of time for Jenna Ellis tonight. I'll see you tomorrow night.